So welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, September 7th, 2025, and today we are going to be taking a look at Race to the White House's 2026 Senate election forecast. Now, in the absence of many major prediction sites and forecast sites like 538, we haven't actually had that many substantive updates to political forecasts across this country in terms of how people see the races going roughly a year and a quarter out from the next midterm cycle. What we are going to be analyzing today is pretty much just what the expectations are in these Senate races, what the forecasts are saying, what the predictions are saying, and pretty much just understand what are the odds and chances of victory for each political party in their respective states. Now, thinking about the last video I made earlier on this month, probably about 7 days ago today, I believe I produced it on September 1st, I talked about the state of the race for the 2026 Senate elections, but those were predictions based on expected margins. And so in today's video, we're going to be getting into a little bit more of a deeper level of analysis, looking at the actual percent chance of victory for both parties, and arguably, it is quite interesting. Now, you can go through the website, see exactly how they do their forecasts, what they're doing in terms of this map here, their high-level takeaways. Before we actually get into the map, which is what I'm more interested in about this, is that Democrats right now have about a 36% chance of winning the Senate majority. Republicans are at about 64%. So these odds are actually quite high for Democrats. I think that, looking at the current state of the race in many of these states, it actually is quite difficult for me to see a clear pathway to a Democratic majority that doesn't take, outside expected, chances. And really, I honestly had expected this race to be way more lopsided. 80-20, maybe even 90-10 in favor of Republicans, simply because they have the White House, they have the vice president breaking that tie in the event Democrats get 3 pickups. Right now, it looks like they're only really targeting 2. And so the 36% number actually is quite surprising, but when you actually break it down, I've already taken a look at some of the statewide analysis here, you can really start to see exactly why this is as high as it is on the forecast. The projected seats, Democrats are expected to have about 49 seats. That's the number the Democrats are really hoping for that would set them up well for 2028. In the event they do better than that, it is a near guarantee that they are able to win back Senate control in 2028 with the right type of year and the right type of candidate. Obviously, a lot hinges on that, but even in 2024 type of environment, Democrats, in theory, would have enough to win back Senate control in 2028 if they get the 50 seats, or 49 seats rather, in the Senate elections here. But again, getting back to this point about the Senate majority, Democrats being at 49 is roughly where, if Democrats get Maine and North Carolina, roughly where they are at. But on the margins here, it looks like Democrats might have a slightly less chance of reaching 49 seats that we otherwise might not think about, and that might come from some of the states that aren't necessarily ones that Republicans hold, but rather some of the seats that Democrats are currently in. So, in terms of the interactive map, we're going to be cross-referencing it, putting it on the map here on the YAPMS map. That's the website, yapms.com. It's in the description box of every single video. You can check it out. The point is that we're going to be taking a look at a lot of different metric points, and I want to actually use them on a map that we're more used to seeing, just for making it a little bit simpler. So obviously, Democrats and Republicans have their states where they are considered to be safe and solid and locked in terms of chance at victory. States like Oklahoma, Democrats have less than a 2% chance of winning. Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, these are all states that I'd say, when they're around the 90%, 91% plus state of the race, I'd say arguably those are safe for the Republican Party. And so as we characterize the states, I'm going to go ahead. Montana, actually, I don't know if it was over there. It is over in the 90% column. It does look a little bit more competitive, but in reality, it's not meant to be that way. Kansas is taking me a little bit for surprise, but again, weird things happen in that state often. Looking at the forecast here, pretty much where we're at is that Republicans, in terms of safe states where they have a 90% chance of winning or higher, they're at about 44 seats, and the Democrats right now are at about 34 seats. Now, of course, Democrats have their own fair share of states that they are expected to win with more than a 90% chance in states like Illinois and Virginia and New Jersey, Delaware, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Colorado, yes, Colorado, and Oregon. Democrats have a solid chance of winning in. New Mexico, I wonder if it's at the 90%. Yes, Ben Ray Lujan is also there too. Safe, 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 as I characterize the map here. And you start to see that across many of these races, it is Democrats who start to play catch-up, but still find themselves a little bit short of winning in some areas that, again, might be necessary for Democrats to win back Senate control. But at baseline, Republicans and Democrats have about similar starting positions. Republicans are at 44. Democrats are at 43. There are some surprises on the map here. I've already mentioned one being Kansas. Nebraska might throw you a little bit for a loop if you weren't privy to the fact that Dan Osborne is running for Senate yet again. But where we're at is, 13 seats that are seemingly closer than a 90-10 or a 95-5 or 99-1 state here. Meaning that these states, there is at least a 1 in 10 chance, if not higher, in some cases significantly higher, that the opposition party wins some of these seats. To save us time and not really focus on some of the states that aren't as important here, and I know obviously every election is important, but some are going to receive a lot more attention than others, states like Nebraska and Kansas right now have Republicans at about an 87% chance in Nebraska and 86% chance in Kansas. I'm really surprised by the Kansas number. I think that maybe Race to the White House is seeing something that is a little bit more difficult for us to see. The thing about the Senate race in Nebraska is although that Pete Ricketts is running, Dan Osborne is a very clear overperformer. And if Democrats do get to the point of not nominating anyone and running alongside Dan Osborne, I think that is going to be something that very much makes it so. Nebraska is on the closer side than Kansas. After all, Donald Trump did win Kansas by about 16. Nebraska, he won by about 21. So about a 5-point difference there, but miles and miles of separation between the average Kansas Democratic performance and Dan Osborne's most recent performance in 2024. Democrats, would learn a lot to look at that race and see what can they replicate, what can they do. As it stands right now, I don't really agree with this characterization and this chance, but I do think that, a likely characterization is fair for Nebraska. Kansas, I'm a little less sold on. Either way, I'm going to characterize them as likely red. I'm not going to defy what the forecast is saying because I do think broad strokes here, they understand a lot more than I do about some of these races. And when it comes down to a lot of these other races that are, what I would consider to be, likely for the GOP in terms of chance here, they use different characterizations than us. They use, an 81% chance as lean Republican. I do think that at the end of the day, Florida is a likely state. We'll see about Iowa. That's certainly one worth taking a stab at and conversation point. Alaska, Iowa, and Florida, though, by my most recent video talking about the political betting markets, 75% plus to that 90% range are likely states. For the GOP, that's Florida, Iowa, and Alaska. And so that puts Republicans in a pretty good position, not Ohio, autopilot there. Florida and Alaska move over in that column. What I find to be surprising, though, is that in Iowa and Alaska, we are on the verge of seeing these states maybe narrow down. The Democrats might have a 1 in 4 chance at victory in these states, and I actually don't really disagree. Ashley Hinson is a strong candidate, and I think she'll win, and I think she'll do so. They project her to win by 9. But in the event that 2026 turns in a direction that is, massively in favor of the Democratic Party, which is a non-zero chance that happens, and Josh Turek is also quite a strong candidate for the Dems, there could be a circumstance where the state of Iowa does, in fact, swing towards the Democratic Party. And it'd be very interesting to see, exactly how that happens. Right now, though, certainly not the likeliest thing to happen. In Alaska, if Mary Peltola enters into the race, it will significantly narrow up. I imagine that one will narrow down as well. Florida, I think, Ashley Moody is in a good position. She's going to win the race. Not much really considered there on the Republican side that Democrats should even look at as an opportunity. Florida right now, I agree, as a likely red state. In terms of margin, I have it there as well. But as it stands, puts Republicans at 49 seats. Now, Democrats have their fair share of likely states as well. A lot of them were moving over in the safe column, but states like New Hampshire, right on that cusp of being lean versus likely, but as of now, is Chris Pappas winning by a likely margin. In the state of Minnesota, Penny Flanagan, the lieutenant governor under Governor Tim Walz, is likely going to become the next United States senator from the state unless Annie Craig wins the primary there. Either way, Democrats are going to win that race. Right now, likely for the Democratic Party. Believe it or not, Georgia. Jon Ossoff is running against Mike Collins, Buddy Carter, names that may sound vaguely familiar. But they're not the most electable Republicans, and I do believe Jon Ossoff, as much as this is a state that did vote for Donald Trump, the expectations here in terms of margin is that Ossoff wins by 7.6%. It is quite an interesting race here. As of now, I consider that to be a likely blue state based off the percent chance of victory. And also, believe it or not, a lot of these margins do largely align. For instance, in Iowa, 8.5% is likely red. Florida, 8.8% is likely red. Alaska, too. Kansas is likely. Nebraska is likely. The only ones here, South Carolina, is on that point. But Lindsey Graham is certainly going to win that race here. So, again, taking a look at a lot of these margins, taking a look at what the predictions are as it stands, these states are the ones that are coming in for the Democratic Party. Now, as we get to the remaining states, Michigan, Ohio, North Carolina, Maine, and surprisingly, Texas. We'll start with Texas because that's the one that's a little bit easier to explain. Ken Paxton is the expected Republican nominee according to this forecast. That actually makes a lot of sense because if it is Paxton, the race does narrow up to Democrats having probably a 1 in 4 chance at winning. But obviously, something that's expected to happen 75% of the time is far more likely than the 25%, but doesn't take it out of the realm of possibility. And that's because Paxton is so bad on the Republican side. I could not find a better Republican for Democrats to run against in a state like Texas. Now, if John Cornyn wins the nomination, this race jumps up tremendously to being a race that Republicans are probably going to win by 10 to 12 points if it's John Cornyn. If it's Ken Paxton, I tend to agree with this analysis that Paxton would win probably by about 6 points, but certainly, you could see it if you're running Tallarico, if you're running a strong Democrat, the race could shift. And also, too, we are still a year out from the election, and Paxton, a lot of his vulnerabilities have only been really exposed in the GOP primary. As more voters pay attention and start to learn more and more about him, I still remember that at this point in time in 2023, Mark Robinson was leading Josh Stein in polling in North Carolina, that by the time a year later went on to lose by 15 points. And I'm not saying Paxton will lose a Trump plus 14 state by 15, don't get me wrong, but I do think he could narrow it up, and I think he would be kryptonite for the Republican Party in that Senate race, and also in future years too, because by no means would he be locked in after winning one term. But right now, this is a race that, according to the standardizing the way we do these things, would be a lean red state. Margin puts it there barely on the lean edge too, 5.9%, which is on the cusp of being a lean state, but actually is likely. 74.7% is right on that point too, where we can say it is lean technically, but being a quarter of a percentage point off from being a safe state or a likely state for the GOP is a bit iffy. I don't want to spend too much more time talking about Texas here, but I could certainly see it swing back and forth depending on who Republicans nominate, and that's pretty much what this data is telling us. The final few states here are quite important. Ultimately, though, Republicans do have the majority. 50, J.D. Vance breaks the tie, meaning if Democrats win all the remaining 4 seats, Republicans will still have the governing majority in the United States Senate. But ultimately, Democrats are vying heavily for Maine with Graham Plattner right now, who's the top-performing Democrat in that race. In Michigan, it's a bit of a toss-up as to who's the top-performing Democrat in that, but 3 very interesting candidates, all of which have different pros and cons for the nomination that people have been talking about. In Ohio, Sherrod Brown is running as the Democrat there. In North Carolina, we'll see what happens. Roy Cooper is the favorite. Let's start off by looking at some of the lesser competitive states, Ohio and North Carolina, which North Carolina, respectively, I don't believe this margin that he's supposed to win by 8.1%, but I do believe the percent chance of 75. As it stands right now, the state of Ohio has about a 68% chance for John Husted. So what we're learning is that, North Carolina is likely to elect its Democratic governor that had served for 8 years and 8 years as attorney general and in the state legislature, had never lost and has never lost an election in North Carolina. He's likely, Roy Cooper, going on to be likely the next United States Senator from the state of North Carolina. But John Husted, who is the Republican appointee, former lieutenant governor under Mike DeWine, went on and now is a United States Senator. He probably does beat Sherrod Brown, but it shows that Democrats have about a 1 in 3 chance at victory in the state of Ohio, which is roughly what they had in the last election in 2024 when Bernie Moreno defeated Sherrod Brown by a margin of about 4 points, when Kamala Harris lost the state by about 11. And so Sherrod Brown has a history of outpacing national Democrats here, but it is still a tough race because Ohio fundamentally is a red state. Republican governor, Republican state legislature, 2 Republican senators, more Republican representatives in the House of Representatives. Democrats have not won Ohio since Obama, who won it by 3. But in 2016, Trump won it by 8. Then he won it by 8 again. And this time he won it by 11. The trends aren't moving in the direction of the Democratic Party. And even though it is 2026, I think this forecast gets it right in saying that right now Houston is the favorite, but it does still give Sherrod Brown a strong chance at victory. He just isn't the favorite. The final two states here that are really interesting and have been, Michigan, we don't talk about it much, but it is very important and far closer for Democrats than they realize. Maine, they've known how close it would be, but as it stands right now, Michigan, Haley Stevens is the presumptive nominee on this forecast, has about a 62% chance at victory. Now, that's still a lean characterization on the map here, but don't get me wrong. Michigan should not be this competitive. There are a lot of reasons that Michigan is competitive. Haley Stevens at the top, people look at this and say, okay, maybe she won't win, maybe she will win, right? People say the same about El Said. People say the same thing about McMorrow. There's a lot of takes about the Michigan Democratic primary because it's so contested and everybody swears up and down that, this race is going to be decided by whatever it is. But in reality, it has still been a stalemate. The numbers haven't really shifted despite months of campaigning. So we'll see what happens in Michigan. But it is a race that Democrats should be locking up. And with the right candidate, they can. But as it stands, without a clear nominee as of right now, it's hard to see that happening. In North Carolina, it's clearly Cooper. In Georgia, it's clearly Ossoff. In New Hampshire, it's clearly Pappas. There are reasons that contested primaries often do drag out these races far longer than you think. And as it stands right now, Michigan is a competitive state. The Democrats are the favorites to win. Don't get me wrong, but it absolutely is competitive. The final state to look at here is really the one that makes or breaks Democrats having the possibility of winning the Senate majority in 2028. And that is the state of Maine. Because assuming they win all of the states that they currently hold, Michigan, Georgia, Minnesota, Colorado, New Mexico, New Hampshire, Virginia, Oregon, etc., they need to win Maine in order to have a fighting shot at winning back the Senate majority in the next cycle. And as it stands right now, the numbers say that it's a race that Democrats can win. However, there's a caveat here. The presumptive nominee for Maine Senate is not a candidate who has declared. It's Janet Mills, the Democratic governor, who said that she would make an announcement by November or December of this year as to whether or not she is running for Senate. She can win, but will she run? That's an entirely separate question. Graham Plattner, however, has already announced that he's running in Maine, and it will be very interesting to see how well he does in that primary, especially up against, hypothetically, looking at the state of Maine. Regardless, though, Democrats right now have a 63% chance of victory there, which puts it officially in the lean column on the map, giving the Democrats that magic number of 49, that if and only if 2028 goes their way, they could see a pathway to the Senate majority in that cycle. But in 2026, it's not happening right now. Democrats at 49, Republicans at 51. Democrats flip the state of Maine, and they flip the state of North Carolina and hold on to all the rest. Ohio still comes up short. Texas still comes up short. And Democrats make a fighting chance, seemingly, in Iowa, Florida, and Alaska, but Republicans still hold on. And the final map here is unchanged, save 2 states going into the next cycle, and it sets up Democrats well if they perform well 2 years after this one. Democrats 49, Republicans 51. That's what the race to the White House forecast is saying. Gives Democrats ultimately a 36% chance at winning Senate majority. Republicans at about 2/3. An interesting map. We'll update it and we'll watch it over the coming months to see how it changes. But as of now, the Republicans have the favorites to maintain Senate control. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.